G'day, Jinx here, and this is going to be a tutorial covering quite exciting update to DoomTools, which has introduced a visual patch editor. It's really powerful and it really affects how you run your DoomTools projects, in my opinion. So I'm going to go over all that. First thing you need to do is make sure your DoomTools is updated. So that's DoomTools, and go to the GitHub page. And if you scroll down, you'll find this big long command line. Just copy that, load up your command line, paste it in, and it'll do a big update. Now, I like to do everything with command line, but of course you can do most of these things, if not all of them, with the GUI. So you can also just load up the GUI and come up to help and click on check updates. And of course, because I've already updated it, there's nothing to update, but you can update it through the GUI as well if you want to not use the command line like I just did. Anyway, now that it's updated, if you're in the GUI, you can just simply click on Tools, you go to Textures, you go to wadtex, which is the tool that does all this, and we come down here to Texture Editor. We just click on that, and there is the new patch editor. Now, you might be familiar with this kind of patch editor if you use Slade. So if I just load up Doom in Slade and go to the Texture One file and double click that lump, it'll actually load up the patch editor that comes with Slade. And the way textures work in Doom is all through patches. So if I go to Big Door 2 and we have a look at this texture, Big Door 2, is made up of a single lump of bitmap data, like a bitmap file called door2_4. So if I go into the Doom wad and I type door2_4 is the actual bitmap data itself. But the texture, the thing you see in Doom, the thing that is applied to the wall, is called Big Door 2. Now, Big Door 2 is a very simple texture because it only has a single patch. As you can see, it's just one big patch that takes up the entire texture, all right? But if I go to, say, Comp, and I have a look at Comp Wall 2, you can see here that this is actually made of 9 different patches. Well, it's made of 8 different patches because one is doubled up. And all that bitmap data are all separate files, and you can arrange them in any way you like and create your own unique textures. And a lot of textures in Doom you wouldn't think are patches are actually patches. Like if I just type in, I think it's the port 2. This is a very, very famous patch, doesn't tile very well, but this is actually made out of all these individual slots. In fact, you can actually make this tile a lot better just by rearranging this patch if you wanted to. But that is what patches are. Patches are the physical bitmap data, and the textures are what we actually see in Doom. So if I just load up a texture1.txt file from Doom 2 itself, and the texture.txt file is just a DoomTools texture definition file that is a text representation of the texture lump. And let's just find that comp wall again. Here it is. And here you can see exactly how the texture is defined within the DoomTools texture file, which is then used by DoomTools to create the texture lump, which, allows you to use the textures inside Doom. And this is a very similar file to what Slade uses. So if I go into the Doom 2 wad in Slade, I just type in TextureX, and I click on that and I right click that, convert to textures. It'll actually create a text file definition of the same data. So it's very, very similar, except it's got these brackets and it's a little bit more complicated to write. Anyway, the way the text file definition works is very simple. You have the name of the texture, that's the actual texture you assign to the wall. You have the size of the texture, and then you have the name of all the individual lumps, which are the physical bitmap data that are inside that texture. So these are all the patches. And then the offset, which shows you where they are offset from the size of the wall. Now, you used to have to edit your patches manually in this text file, or you'd have to edit them in the visual editor in Slade and then export them somehow. And at the end of the video, for those people who still prefer the Slade one, I will show you how to do that. But the visual editor simply allows you to create this text file in a visual way with no math, and it's all, you can see what you're doing and you can experiment a lot easier. It's much, much better. And that's what patches are, and that's what the patch visual editor is. So just before we start, we're going to set up a DoomTools project and we're going to set up Ultimate Doom Builder to use that project. Now I usually do this in the command line, but I'm going to do it using the visual editor. So we're going to go Tools, doommake, New Project, doing a WAD project, and I'm going to go Path to Project Folder. Now this might be controversial, but what I like to do in all my DoomTools project is I just enable everything. I turn on maps, I turn on assets, I even turn on DecoHack, and in the textures we're going to set that to the project with boom extensions because I always do MBF21 maps. The reason I enable everything is because it allows me to use the project for anything. If you only enable certain things, then certain build targets are not going to be automatically created. But just turning everything on means you can use the project for anything, and the stuff that you don't want to use it for, you just don't use. Anyway, after all that's done, I'm just going to hit Create Project. I'm going to call this Tut DoomTools Patch Editor. And for the iWAD, I'm just going to select doom2.wad. And for the patch file, because I do MBF21, I'm just going to go dsd hacked. Boom. And if I go open folder, this is now our DoomTools project and it's ready to go. Now, again, I do all my stuff mainly with the command line. So I'm just going to load up the command line to the root of my project. So you can see that's the root of my project. And I'm just going to type in doommake. I always run doommake right at the beginning, just to make sure everything's running. Now here I am in my file manager of choice, which is Total Commander, and you can see that it's successfully done a make and built all the initial WADs, which currently don't actually have any data in them, but they're there and everything's working. Sweet. The next thing I want to do is to set up Ultimate Doom Builder to use this project correctly. I'm going to go File, New Map. Now I'm going to select MBF21 because that's the mapping type of my choice. And I'm going to go Add Resource, and I'm going to browse to my project directory. So that's the root of my project there. And then I'm just going to go into Build. I'm going to select textures.wad. And then once that's selected, make sure you tick Exclude Resources from Testing Parameters. Then I'm going to add resource again. And this time I'm going to select the Tut release WAD. That's the actual release WAD there. So I'm just going to go open. And this time I'm not going to exclude that. I'm going to go OK. Then I'm going to click Edit Pre and Post Commands. And I'm going to browse to the root of my DoomTools project again. And once there, I'll just select that folder. I'm just going to type in doommake release. And then I'm going to copy that entire load of code into test map commands. So working directory is going to be my DoomTools project. And then for the commands is doommake release. Okay, and now we are ready to use Ultimate Doom Builder. So that's done. It's going to sort of simple box and place a guy in it. I'm just going to go save as, go into my root of my project folder. I'm going to go into source. I'm going to go into maps. I'm going to just call this Map01 testing demo. Now, when you are saving into your maps folder, it doesn't matter what you name the file. The map position in the WAD is actually taken from map options where it says level name. So you can name your file anything and you adjust whether it's a map01 by this value here. I just like using map01 in the file name because it makes it easier for me to see what's happening outside of Ultimate Doom Builder. Okay, so that's the DoomTools project setup and Ultimate Doom Builder setup. Now we're going to actually get to the meat of this, which is the patch editor itself. So the first thing we need to do is get some textures to actually use as patches. So let's go to the Doom World forums. We'll go to Resources and we'll go to Post Your Doom Textures. And I've chosen this post here by Violent Beetle. So what he's done is he's supplied these sort of Aztec-y looking textures, and then he's done a few variants of the wall texture underneath. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take these wall textures, like these ones here, and I'm going to cut them into sections, which will allow us to construct these variants inside the patch editor and make more variants that he hasn't supplied without actually adding any more texture data to the WAD. And yes, it's not really the most practical example. So the reason the patches existed was to minimize file size of the WAD in the old days. And file size isn't really a limitation now. But there are still some pretty funky things you can do, especially with the placing of exit signs and switches, or making variations on the fly just as part of your mapping process. So I'm obviously not saying that Violent Beetle should have released these as patches. I'm just going to use them as an example of how patches work. Okie dokie. So through the magic of editing, I haven't put you through all that pain of watching me just cut things up in an image editor. And what I've done is just cut those textures into segments like this. Very, very simple. I've also added the full textures that he had in that list as well. So let's go back over into our project and we're going to go into source and we're going to go into convert. Now, anything you place in the convert folders are going to be converted to your palette, and they're also going to be converted into the Doom format. If you place things just straight into the textures folder here, where there's flats, patches and stuff, these folders will not be converted. They won't even be palletized. This is a great place to put textures or sprites that you are extracting from other WADs. Or if you're creating a true color WAD and you're actually going to be storing true color PNGs inside the WAD file. But I almost always just use the convert folders. So let's go into the convert folder, and we're just going to do a couple of things here. For starters, we're going to copy into the patches dir all those Violent Beetle single patch textures. So we have the green ones and the tan ones. Then inside texture 1, I'm going to copy in all the single patch textures. So that's these ones here. Now, what's the difference? Basically, remember when I told you about the texture definitions file, which you can access by just going to source, textures, and there it is, texture 1. It's just a text file. I use Notepad++. And you can see at the moment there's nothing in it. Anyway, when you place files in the texture 1 folder, DoomTools will on the fly, so it doesn't actually edit the texture definition text file and fill it up with all this data. It keeps it nice and clean. It'll create a texture with the same name as your file name and apply it as a patch. So it automates the entire patching process. So let's go into Ultimate Doom Builder and we're going to press F8 to refresh. And remember when we set up this Ultimate Doom Builder map, we went into the pre-commands and we added a doommake command, doommake release. Well, what that does is that when we hit F8 or when we save and then do a test, it's actually going to rebuild the project and make sure everything's up to date. So we've rebuilt all the WAD files using our open directory source files, and they're just ready to go just by hitting F8. And then I'm going to open up the line def tab, and in the middle, I'm going to click on that, and I'm going to come down, and you can see in my textures.wad, I now have the 10 textures that I copied into the texture 1 dir. So what it's done is that anything inside the convert texture 1 folder, it is going to automatically produce a patch file using that whole texture as a patch, and then name the texture as the same as the file name. Don't use file names higher than 8 characters. You can use underscores and some simple things like numbers, but keep it simple, 8 characters. And that's just a really quick way of making patches without having to worry about the editor or anything. If you're just having a texture, which is a single patch, just throw them in texture 1 and you're done. So let's just open up the command prompt and we're going to load up the editor. So that's wadtex -GUI editor. And I really like loading it from the command line because it's free. It's not inside that windowed box. It's much easier to use in my opinion. All you got to do now is some basic setup. You've got patches and sources. So what we're going to do, we're going to click project directory and we're just going to select the root of our project folder. And that is automatically going to read what the IWAD is from our project. And over here, we've got palette source. Now, because we're just using the Doom 2 palette, we're just going to leave it at this Doom 2 WAD, but you can of course choose any WAD or any palette file to if you're using a custom palette. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go File, Open File, and in our project folder, I go into Source, textures, and I'm going to load the textureone.txt, which is the definition file. And that's basically empty because it's only got this one here, which is the null texture. Don't delete that. And now let's just add a texture. We'll click on this. We'll call this VB Violent Beetle 01. And it's 128 by 128. We'll just hit OK. And then in patches, we'll just click bam. And what you can see here are all the patches from the Doom 2 WAD, as well, so if I press the V button, the patches that we've added ourselves. And this is the big difference between Slade and the DoomTools patch editor. The DoomTools patch editor can read the patches from your WAD files, but also read the patches that are contained loose inside your source folders, which Slade can't do. So use the Slade patch editor. You have to integrate it all into a WAD and then edit them. In this one, we can actually edit raw files loose in our source folders. So all I'm going to do is I'm just going to grab all 4 of those greens and just go OK and add them in. And now I just need to arrange them. So I can just click on 2 and then I click on the image area, and you can zoom in using the mouse with the plus and minus key. And then using the arrow keys, I'm just going to position these patches where I want them to be in the texture. Okay, and there is the finished texture. We've created a new wall texture, 128 by 128, using the 4 patches of those sections. And if I just go back to my originals, this is what the original texture looks like. And this is our new one. So they're basically identical because it's the same data. It's just arranged in sections. So that's fine. I actually renamed this one. I'll call this VBG. Remember, make sure it's not over 8. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That's fine. And I'll make another one. I'll call this VB underscore tan underscore 01. Add the patches. I'll add the tan ones. And we can now copy this data if we wanted. So instead of using the arrow keys like we did before, I could just come in here. Green is 39, 65, 88. So that's 39, 65, 88. And we've made a second texture. Okay, so what we're going to do now is that we're going to create another texture by just copying one of these. So we're just going to click on this one and right click it. And we're going to go copy texture. And we're going to call this one M for mixed. And just set OK. And then what we're going to do is I'm going to remove the 2 center ones, VB, add 2 and 3 for the tan. And these are 39, 65. And now we've made a variant. So if we go back into the original files, there's the variant that he gave us as a single patch texture, and we've created it using the patch editor. Super, super simple. So if I come over here, the next one looks like that. So the next one, we'll just right click, we go copy texture, M02, and this time we're taking the 2 top ones. Let me just see if I can arrange this in a way that's a bit easier. There we are. So we'll get rid of these 2 and we'll put in the 2 tans, and they are 0 and 39. So we just click on this one, type 39, and now we've made that variant. Now I'll just go through and I'll make all these variants, and I'll get back to you. Now these are very, very simple patches. After we go through these steps, I'll do another couple of patches. I'll show a switch, and I will show a patch using transparent textures, and we'll make some unique textures using the Violent Beetle source material that were not actually provided in the thread, just in the patch editor. Okay, so I've just created all them, and now all I need to do is hit File, Save, and overwrite that texture 1, come back into DoomTools and press F8. It'll do the build, and now if I just go to my textures and then just come and click on the textures WAD, which is our resource file that we've been creating, and voila, there are all our patch textures along with all our single patch textures that we have added to our project, ready to use. So what I'll do is I'll just modify this room so it's a bunch of 128 long walls, just so I can apply a different texture to all the different walls so we can see them all in game. There we go. But here's the thing, if I hit the play button, they're not showing up. And that's just the way DoomTools works. If you want to know exactly what's going on here, just check out my textures tutorial. I don't want to go through it a second time. Link will be in the description. What you want to do is just hit the save, and then we do the play button. And that's going to attach these files into our release WAD, which means they'll now be visible when you run the game. Now you only need to save and rebuild when you're adding new textures. So for example, I can say go to this wall here, or go to this entire section of walls and add, say, this green. And then I can preview without saving. And because that green texture is already applied to the WAD, we don't need to do a save before preview. And that's just the way DoomTools works. What it does is that you can have as many maps as you want, as many resource WADs as you want, but it will only add into your release WAD the textures you physically use. So anytime that you use a texture that is not part of the iWAD, for the first time in your map, you'll need to save to do a live preview. But once you've actually saved it and applied that texture to the release WAD and it's included, then it's always there and you can always just do live previews without having to save. And that is basically how it works. We've also got I'll just apply some of the other ones as well. Okay, so if I do a preview, because I've added new textures that we haven't used in the map before, they're not going to work. I save, do a preview, it does a build, and now they're all in there. So that is so simple. But the texture builder can do a lot more interesting things. So let me just go back to the builder. Okay, so let's make another one. We'll go back to the patch editor. We'll go new patch. Make this 120.28, VB underscore, we'll call this D for Doom 01. And we're going to do something a little bit different here. I'll just zoom in. Let's go into the patch editor. What we're going to do is we're going to look for one of those great textures. Not that one. Let's get one with a little bit better transparency. What I'm trying to get at here is that you can use transparency to create interesting, let's use this one. To create interesting walls. Okay, so here we go. And now I'm going to add some of these patches. What are we going to do? We're going to put in, no, not those ones. Put in this one here and put in this one here. Now, basically, the lower you are in the list, the more on top you are, like a sandwich. So whatever's on the base of the list is on top of the stack. So if I get the great and I move it down like that, you can see now it's in front of those other textures that we just added. So these textures, if I just move that out of the way again, these textures are kind of like a mirrored version of itself. These are a 64 texture, right? So if I just offset that by 64, it'll cover the entire thing. Now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to move it another 32. So I'm going to make this 96 and I'm going to make this one minus 32, okay? And then I'll just bring the great to the front. Now, the bit that's outside will not actually be rendered, okay? So the texture itself is 128 by 128. But when you're building your patches, you can overlay patches outside of that area, and only the data inside the definition of the size of the bitmap, the 128 by 128, will be visible. Everything hanging off the edge will just be ignored by Doom. So what we've basically made here is a kind of space in the middle between two pillars. So let's add another patch, and why don't we get that horror patch, move it up, and we'll move it behind the pillars as well. And this time I'm just going to drag this, we'll stick it like that, and then we'll add two VB10s for let's add just 1 and 2. We'll move both of these below the grate, and we'll move both of these below the pillars. Then I'll just move this down like so. So this is the texture we've created. So let's just save that. Go back into Ultimate Doom Builder, and then I'll just hit F8 to refresh. And then I'll come in here. Let's grab this one. And there is our new texture. And you can see it's now working. If I just copy that across, not bad. So let's save this. Remember, we've got to save and do a build to get the proper preview because it's a new texture being added to the map. And there's the new texture we just created in a few minutes using a mix of original Doom textures and our new textures, which is something you cannot do in Slade as easily. And you can do all sorts of things in this vein. So if I go back to the patch editor, let's make a copy of the tan texture, and I'll call this E for exit, and we're going to go plus to add a patch, and we're going to come down here and find the exit signs, get exit 1, and I'm just going to stick this right there. And now we have an exit sign. In fact, let's get a little bit more creative here. What else have we got here that we can put in? Like a row of skulls on here. Well, the skulls look like they'll fit quite neatly on that middle bar there. Now we'll need to grab a bunch of them. And unfortunately, at the moment, you can't actually copy patches inside a texture. You need to keep jumping to the patch selector and add them. I'm absolutely certain that will be added eventually. You've got to remember, this is a work in progress, and DoomTools is constantly being updated and improved by Mtrop. But yeah, we'll just grab a couple of skulls. Now I'll just remove that middle tan line and put in one of the green ones just to give it a little bit of an accent, and voila. Okay, and there we go. I've created a exit wall. So let's just save that. Go into Ultimate Doom Builder, press F8 to do a build. And now I can create, I go boom, and there is my new exit. Save and play. And there you go. We've got a yellow skull key exit. Let's go back to the patch editor. I'm going to add a new one. This time I'm just going to copy the tan one again. So I'm going to call it S1_on. I'm just going to come in here and I'm going to grab one of the switches. How about this switch? That looks like it'll match. So this is called on. So let's just grab that one and we'll stick this about there. And then I'll duplicate that and I'll call this off W 4668 4668. And let's just save that. We do another F8. And now let's copy this to here. And whack in the switch. Let's just check that height. Looks about right. Could probably be a little bit lower. But we're looking pretty good. Okay, so what I think I'm actually going to do is I'm going to delete those two textures and rebuild this switch, but I'm going to lower the switch a little and I'm going to place it on the texture that has the row of skulls. And then it will like match up, that entire wall will look coherent together. But this is really the power of the patch system. Like as you're mapping and you think you need a detail in a wall, instead of having to build it into the wall using lines and, you know, doing adjustments to your texture offsets and all this kind of stuff and making little inserts into your walls, you can just jump into the patch editor and knock out a variant in minutes. Okay, let's save that. Let's reload this. And you can see now we have an exit wall made of two textures. Now the problem is, even if I load this up, this isn't actually going to do anything because We haven't actually turned it into a switch, which is what I'll show you how to do now. Now, creating a animated texture or a switch inside Boom formatted WADs isn't actually part of the patch editor, but I'm just going to show you how to do it because it's so simple, and the video is this long anyway, so let's just get everything in it. Basically, this is our switch, right? It's VBS1 on and VBS1 off. Okay, so I'm just going to click on rename just to copy that name. So I have it in my clipboard. Then I come to my DoomTools project. I go into source, I go into textures, and there's this definitions file called defswani, switch and animation definition. And we're just going to edit that in a text editor. Basically, you don't have to worry too much about all this stuff. We'll talk about the animations down the bottom, but there's shareware Doom, there's registered Doom, and there's just all versions. So that's category 1, 2, and 3. You just want to place yours in category 3. Forget about the other ones unless you're doing something super fancy. So all we need to do is press 3 for the new category, tab over, and place in the off one first, and then the on one second. So first one is off, second one is on, and just save that. That's literally all you need to do. Now just go into Ultimate Doom Builder. We'll do an F8 to do a build. And now what I'll do is I'll just quickly make a switch for us just so we can see it in action. Okay, so I've just made a very, very simple switch here, just applying that texture. So it's basically just applied the off texture, and I've made a little door over here. I hit save, I do a build, and now you can see when I click it, it now animates as the switch activates. So that's all you need to do to actually create a switch, is you just go into your switch file and you make a new entry. So make a new entry, and then you have switch off, and then switch on. And those textures have to exist inside your project, but once they're in this switch definition file, they will then function as a switch that will change as you press it. Now, animated textures are basically identical. So this will give me a good chance to show you the actual text editor version of the patch editor as well. So we'll have a quick look at this. Let's find, where is it? Here. So we made this little patch here. It's kind of cool, but what about if we had running blood instead of that skull? So what I'm trying to get at here is that once you've created the textures with the patches, they work just like normal textures. A cool trick you can do actually is to design your patches as 64 by 64 squares. And that way they're the same size as the flats. And then all you need to do is copy that 64 by 64 patch file as a new version into your flat directory. And then you have a flat which is identical to the patch you're using on a wall to create your texture. And that's a way that you can actually fake having flats extend off the floor up onto the wall really, really easily, because MBF21, unlike UDMF, doesn't actually allow you to assign flats to walls. But you can create really complicated wall textures using 64 by 64 sections, and those 64 by 64 sections also then perfectly fit your flats. But anyway, the point is, what I'm doing now is I'm making a texture which we're going to use to show an animated texture, which is just a little bit of bookkeeping just to make sure this video covers all angles, but it's almost identical to how we did the switches. We are going to build the texture in the patch editor, and then we're going to set the animation frames inside the definition file, just like we did for the switches. So I've got the two blood falls from Doom. I've still got the side pillars, these ones here. And then I've got two new grates, and I've got a green top bit here. So that's our new texture. So let's save this. And this time we're not going to go straight into the build. What we're going to do is I'm going to go back to my folder, and I'm going to come down and I'm going to edit the texture1 text file inside my text editor, just for something different to show you another way of doing it. Because this is how we used to do it in DoomTools. This is just what the texture1 definition file looks like that the patch editor creates for us. I'll come down here, and here is the texture that we just created. You can see that it's got the blood falls, it's got the pillars, it's got the two grates, and it's got the green top that Violent Beetle made. Now remember, there's 4 blood fall textures. So we're going to copy this 4 times, or 3 times. Call this 4, 3, 2. And remember, if we just go back to the patch editor, you can see that there is 1, 2, 3, 4 textures in the animation. The only thing we need to change is blood fall 1. So let's just make that 2. We make this 3, and we'll make this 4, and we'll save this. We come back to here, and we'll click on File, Refresh Texture List, and now you can see that those changes I've done to the text file has propagated through. I copied the texture 3 times and edited it, and now I have 4 variants of that blood wall texture showing the blood rain animation. Okay, so let's go into Doom. We press F8 to rebuild. We'll come in, I'll put it here. Okay, save that, do a preview, and you can see it's in there. Oops, I forgot to turn it off from the switch. That's the switch, isn't it? Yeah. But it's not animating, right? So that's wrong. All we need to do is go straight back into our directory and go back to the definition file, the one that says def swani. So that's definitions for switches and animations. Hit F4 to edit it. Open up your editor and come down to the next section below the switch section where you've got your animated flats and sprites. This section is for flats. This works exactly the same for flats. We're just doing it with textures. So we come down to textures and we come down and we see that blood fall is right here. Okay. So the way this works is you have the last frame and the first frame and then the amount of ticks per frame. Now these ones are all set to 8 ticks per frame. And because we're using the blood falls texture, we've just sort of placed its patch in another texture. We'll just copy that straight out. So we go 8 and the last one, VB animation 1 frame 4, VB animation 1 frame 1, and save. So all we've done is we come to the textures part of that file, we type in the frame rate, which in this case is 8 ticks, and then we type in the last frame and the first frame, and these have to be physical textures in the texture lump, just like we did. Just do another build, and now we test it. And you can see it is now animating. You can see it bleeding. You know what I mean? And it's that simple to do animated textures. So all animated textures are just built just like normal textures, just like your normal patches, but we've built them and then added them to the animation definition in the way I just showed you. Okay, and of course, switch texture is working too, so everything's working. Sweet! So in another one of my videos, I showed you how to use resource WADs in DoomTools released by other mappers, so like texture packs or sprite packs or whatever, for example. So we're going to just quickly show you how to patch integrate them as well, and that should be the last part of this tutorial. So I'm just going to come into my texture pack archive and let's try this BTSX one, which is getting quite a lot of love recently. We'll come to the root of our folder. You go into source, you go into WADs, you go into textures, and you copy in the resource pack. Now, once this is copied, we have to add this into Ultimate Doom Builder. We go to Edit, Map Options, and now we hit Add Resource. We go to our source folder, we go into WADs, textures, and we just grab that file and make sure we click Exclude from Testing and just drag it down one because we want the actual release file to be the last thing loaded. Okay, so I just dragged the release file down. So it's pretty hard to tell because Ultimate Doom Builder doesn't let you resize the map option window, But if I hold my mouse over, you can see that the very last WAD is the release file that we're creating with DoomTools. And the one above it is the one we just added. So let's go OK. And now if I come in here and let's change this texture, we now have all the patches released in that WAD. Okay. How about this one? Okay. And just like before, if we do a preview, we're not going to be able to see it. But if we save and do a build and a preview, then we will be able to see it. Okay. If I make a new texture and I call this BTX ed, but unfortunately, if I go add patch, I actually don't have access to any of those texture archive WADs that I place inside the WAD texture dir like we just did with that BTX resource file. But there is a way around this where you can use your loose source files, you can use the Doom 2 patches, and you can use any resource WADs as well, all inside the patch editor. Now, this is a workaround. I would bet money eventually there'll be an option to just add WADs to the patch editor, but for now, this is how you have to do it. Let's go back to our directory, and I'm just going to go outside of my DoomTools project, and I'm just going to write BTX and copy the entire BTX WAD into there, like so. Then I'm going to load up my command prompt, and I'm just going to go into that directory. And there's our WAD file. Now, if I just type in doommake --help, we come up here and there's actually a function which is very, very handy called explode and then the WAD file. Now, what this function does is that it turns a WAD file into a working DoomTools project by like unpacking it into all the source directories. Now, it is experimental. It's not 100% working right now. It's got some issues with animations and stuff, but you know, it will improve over time. But even so, it's still extremely useful because you can take a WAD and you can unpack it very, very easily in a way that makes sense to DoomTools. And it also allows you to convert all the data into PNGs using your palette, even if it's a custom palette. So even though it says that it's experimental and there's probably some pretty powerful improvements planned for this tool, as is, it's still really, really useful. So I'm just going to go into that directory in my command line. So you can see I've just got the copy of that WAD, and I'm going to run a command like this. Now this command is going to be in the description. Let me just expand this so we can see that a little better. There we are. So it's basically just doommake and then the name of the directory that it's going to create. And then we have convert palette. And then we're going to be using my Doom2 iWAD. And that's just the path to my Doom2 iWAD. We're going to go convert, explode, and this is the name of the WAD that we're exploding. And that's all we have to do. Okay. And it's going to ask us a couple of questions that don't mean anything. So you can just press enter, enter, and boom, it's going to rip out all the stuff for us that we're going to be using. Now, if I go back to that directory, you can see it's made a directory called BTX. And in it, it's made a DoomTools project, and we should explore these when you want to look at WADs, but we're going to go into source, we're going to go into convert, we're going to go into patches, and you can see we have all the patches that create up that WAD. Now, again, because this is a handmade one, most of them are going to be single patch textures because that's how most texture WADs are made. Like, for example, this one here could be tiny little squares, but it's a single big texture. But if we look through here, there will be some that might be of interest. I mean, we've got the ones with the transparencies. Okay, so like I said, not a great, I should have thought through this a little bit better. This WAD doesn't have a lot of patches, but we do have the nice switch patches here, for example, that we might want to use. And there's a lot of things with transparencies. So what we're actually going to do is we're going to go into our source folders, into convert, into patches, and I'm going to make a directory here called BTX. I'm just going to copy all those patches straight into our source folder. Now remember, when you're doing a DoomTools project, it's going to only use the files that you assign to your map. So you can actually have huge amounts of bitmap data in your source directories, but when you run a build, it's only going to embed into the WAD the individual texture data lumps that are required for the textures used by your maps. So if we only use one patch out of this entire BTX folder, only one patch is going to be added to our WAD, even though we've got all this stuff in our source. This is just a working directory. So let's go back to the patch editor, and then we'll hit File, Refresh Available Patches. That's just going to refresh the patch editor with any new files that have been added to the source folders. And we'll go back to that empty BTX ed texture I made. But this time, when we go add patch, we'll have access to all the patches from BTX, as well as all the patches from Doom, as well as all our own custom patches that we've added ourselves. So even though we're going to be using these patches in the creation of our own custom textures to combine BTX with whatever we want to do, we still have access to all the raw BTX textures as they were originally designed through the texture resource WAD, just like normal. So this works in conjunction with the normal way of using a resource WAD. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to make a combined texture. I'm going to use some of Violent Beetle's patches. I'm also going to use some BTX patches, and I'm also going to use some Doom patches. I'm not going to walk you through the whole thing because it's really the exact same methodology that I've already shown a couple of times. You simply select your patch, you place it on your texture, and then you arrange it in a order. So the files at the very bottom of the list are on top of the files at the very back of the list, and you can just layer them up and create a lot of really interesting things. Now, in this demo, I'm sort of making large textures to sort of demonstrate how the editor works, but really the power of the patch editor isn't in designing textures. That's really a place for your 2D apps. That's why most texture WADs release single patch textures, because they just make them in the app and export them. But the power of the patch editor is in combining textures together on the fly while you're making your map, to say making a transition from one type of texture to another, like going from green brick to brown brick. Instead of having to plan ahead and have that texture already designed before you start, you can just go, you know what, I really need like a mixed texture here. Load up the patch editor, boom, you made one, and you keep going. And I feel this allows you to map in a much more organic way, like with this continual flow, especially if you're in a large project and you might have a team of people and you need to contact through Discord or email the 2D guy, and then you got to wait for him to add that texture, and then get it back to you and all that kind of stuff. So this is just a really quick way to do it. And it's particularly good also for doing things like adding exit signs, putting switches on things, these little details that you used to have to build physically into the geometry. And, that adds lines, which can be an issue, especially if you're making vanilla maps. So I actually think the patch editor is a really useful tool, and you can kind of see the power of it, hopefully, through this tutorial. Now, I think I've rambled long enough that the speeding up of this creation of the texture isn't going to give anyone an epileptic fit. So let's come back to reality. Okay, so there we are. So what we've done here is that we've made a patch that is using BTX patches, Doom patches, which is that skull, and our custom ones that we've created ourselves. So let's just save that. Once again, we do an F8 to reload. This will take a little bit of time on the first run because I chose a really bad WAD to pick because it actually has its slightly altered palette. So it's got to do a palette conversion the first time we run this command. And now I can come in. Let's click on there. Bam. And you can see inside our texture WAD, the one that's only got 25 textures in it, that's only got the ones we've created, we now have that combination texture. Okay, so let's just get rid of that and we'll put it on here, where we have that switch. And we'll also, on this one here, we'll just grab another texture from BTX itself. It's got nothing to do with our WADs. Let's grab, how about this one. So we hit save, we do a play, and boom, there you can see our new switch texture that we've just created. Plus, this is coming from BTX, and these ones here are all coming from our custom textures, and the flats and the ceiling and everything, they're coming from Doom. And this texture here is actually got Doom, BTX, and our custom textures. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to rename this 1, and then copy this as 2, add SW, and find that other skull, the on version, and it's 5374. Get rid of the first one. And now we have the on version of that switch. Go back to my definitions file, category 3, 2, and add 1. So add 1 and add 2. Remember that off 1 is the first, so that's off and that's on. Save that. Come back in here, we press F8. Note that the build is really quick now because we've already done the conversions. DoomTools will only do changes if it detects that there is something to change. Otherwise, it'll use your previously cached data. So that really slow first build where it converted all those BTX textures to the Doom palette, it only does it once. Come in here, that's saying there's an error because we renamed the texture. So we'll just reapply that texture using the correct name. And then we'll save it and we'll do a test run. There we go. And now click it, it animates, and the door opens. But you can see how I've created quite a complicated texture just by fiddling around with the patches. And it didn't take much effort at all. That actually looks pretty cool. Now, the interesting thing is, if I come into here and I actually apply the original BTX texture that uses the patch that we've just used from our source directory, DoomTools is able to handle that. And I'll just show you that example now. So if I add the GTHGR texture, so this is the texture here that actually has that patch in it, and this texture is being extracted from the resource WAD, not from our source directories. Now, without saving and doing a build, just hitting the preview, you can see that this patch is already working. So even though this texture is coming from the resource WAD, not from our source folders, the patch itself has already been added to our project through our custom texture. So it's just like any other texture, it already exists, so we don't need to do builds to preview it. And we can confirm that by just loading up our resource WAD inside Slade. So we go into our DoomTools project, we go into build, and we come down to our actual release file, and we come down to our textures. You can see it's only added the textures we need. And even though this Gothic Gargoyle 1 texture that has all the gargoyles, technically we're taking it from 2 different sources. We're taking it from the texture WAD in our WAD's textures folder, but we're also got it inside our source folder. It's only added it once into the release. It just overwrites the second time and it's the same file. So we end up with only 1 copy. So it's completely seamless. Long story short, what you want to do is basically explode the WAD, copy it into your patch dir, and don't forget that you can place all the files in subdirectories. DoomTools will recursively look through directories inside your source folders, and this is really, really important in my opinion for organization. And then it just works exactly the way all the other patches work. And that is basically everything about patches that I know so far. Oh, I almost forgot. There's actually 2 more things to talk about. Let's just go into Slade and we're just going to load up the BTX textures. I'm just going to type in texture to have a look at the texture 1 lump that it comes with. So we're inside the patch editor inside Slade at the moment. And you can see that it's got quite a lot of textures made up of smaller patches, just like we've been talking about in this tutorial. For example, have a look at this quite large texture, which is a number of wall panels, and then on each panel is a different type of switch, allowing you to have a single texture with all the switches matching that one wall. And then all you need to do is make in your geometry of your file a little section to apply the wall and use the texture offsets to see which switch you're using. Very, very cool idea. Great way to do switches. But if I come over here, you can see there's quite a lot of patches, blah, 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 blah. So if we wanted to edit this patch, we would need some way to extract this data from the existing texture lump. And it's really, really easy to do. Let's load up our command line. And you could probably do this with the GUI, but honestly, I've never really done it because I always use the command line. So if you have a look in the GUI, you can probably find it there. If I type wadtex --help, you can see that there is actually an export field, which will export texture lumps as DoomTools style texture definition text files. The easiest way to do this is just to write wadtex, name of your wad, --export, and then just type in texture1.txt, and blam, is done. That will export out the texture1 lump. Now, if you typed in texture2, it'll basically do the same thing. It's going to export the texture2 lump. Now, there is a little problem here. If the texture2 lump does not exist inside the WAD, it's just going to export the first one it finds, which is the texture1 lump, but call the file texture2. That can be a little bit confusing. It's just something to keep an eye on. But the upshot is that it's just wadtex, name of the WAD, -- export, and then type texture1 or texture2.txt. Now, something to take note of, if I just go back into that folder, you can see there's the texture1 text file, and here's the texture2, and if I edit that, it's completely empty, and that's because this WAD doesn't have a texture2. It's not going to error if it can't find the texture2 lump. It's just going to export a blank texture2 definition. But if I edit the texture1 file, you can see that it's got all the patches in the texture1 file that's inside this WAD. And because we have all these patch files actually added to our project, we can in fact just copy this data directly out. So we can come down and find, let's find a big massive patch that we wouldn't want to manually recreate. Look at that one. Wow, that is a huge patch. Okay, so if we just go and copy that entire patch, and now we come into our project, source, textures, and edit our texture1 in our project folder, and we'll just add this to the end. Save that, come into our patch editor and just go open file, and now we open that text file that we just added the thing to. You can see here light 3 is now part of the WAD, right? We've actually added that to it. So you can see that this is made out of all those little sections. Wow, that is a massive patch. So every one of these little lights, look at them, they're all little tiny boxes. This is so we can make it at any length, right? So the very edges, like these boxes, see how they've got the black, see how that one's got sort of the black edging all around it? And then this one over here, one of these center patches, it doesn't have the black edging, and that way you can make this any length without doing any stretching. Pretty interesting, but complicated patch file. The point here though is that using this command line, you can extract a valid texture definition text file that works in DoomTools from any WAD that you are looking at or using. And it'll give you a texture file with all the textures and how they're constructed using the patches, which you can then simply copy sections of it or even just use the entire texture1 file itself as your texture1 file. And then you can make edits to the existing patches that have been supplied. So say you download Jimmy Text and you really like some of his stuff, but you say, you know, I really wish I had this version. I want to modify one of his textures to better suit my map. Instead of having to recreate it all from scratch, you can use this method to actually get that texture definition from his WAD, just paste into yours and then edit it rather than having to create it from nothing. So I actually shot this whole big extra sequence when I demonstrated how that was actually done. But really, it just added a lot of time to the video and not a lot of more information. You've seen already editing patches, editing the text file, making switch definitions already in this video. So it was just a lot of time for nothing. And the video is so long already. But what I basically did is I found a combination switch texture, which is a very common technique in Doom, in modern Doom anyway, where you make a single large texture with repeating patterns for the walls and then different switches on each repeating pattern. And then when you actually create your geometry in the map, you just make like a 32 length segment, say, if that's how wide the switch is, and you can just apply the all-purpose switch texture to it and just use the offsets to, pick the switch that you want to use. And BTX has a pretty cool set of these, and one of the ones you can see in the background being worked on. So basically, I used this technique to extract the texture1 data. Then I copied the switches that were defined in BTX, removed the background lines, and then replaced them with textures from Violent Beetle's forum post to basically recreate the same texture in a much easier way. So instead of having to source and work out all the names of all the switches and everything, I can just copy this existing data from BTX and then edit it into my own version of that texture. And that is what the export function is really used for. And incidentally, for those people who still prefer to use the Slade patch editor, this is how you use it. You can do your editing in the Slade patch editor and then export the data in the same way you've just seen with the wadtex export into a valid DoomTools texture definition file. And you can either, if you do it right, you could just use that texture file raw as, or you can copy the textures in that you have been working on the way I'm doing with this switch textures. The only caveat is the Slade system does not allow you to use the loose files inside your source dirs, not without some fiddling around, making temporary pack files and stuff. It's a real pain. So really the patch editor for DoomTools is, in my opinion, the much better choice if you're working in DoomTools anyway. So again, hopefully I rambled long enough that the speeding up of the switch textures being created hasn't given anyone epileptic fits. And that's about that. And that is the patch editor, which is an extremely powerful tool. And again, Emtrop has so much on his plate. He does so much for the community by making this thing, but I'm absolutely certain that this tool is going to expand over time as he finds the motivation and the need to work on it. But even as it is now, it's extremely powerful. And being able to access the files in your source folders, as well as the WADs, as well as your resource textures, is something that Slade's patch editor literally cannot do. Okay, I think that's about it. I will see you guys next time.